The reason we're here is because before Rosh Hashono, the Rebbe always spoke to the women. There were 3 times a year, bekviyas, 3 times a year, every year, that the Rebbe spoke to Neshey Chabad particularly. One was before Rosh Hashono, one was before Shavuos by the Spring Convention of Agudas Neshey Chabad, and the third time was at the end of the school year. The Rebbe spoke to the graduates. And when there were too many graduates to fit into the Rebbe's room, and the Sikha came downstairs, everybody else was invited in the schus of the girls of the elementary school and the high school and the seminary who were graduating. So one of the 3 times a year the Rebbe speaks is now. So of course, by us there's bepashtis, it's self-understood that the Rebbe speaks now. And unfortunately for many of us, we cannot hear the Rebbe's voice. But the reason we're gathered here is because the Rebbe is speaking to the women. And certainly there's no question that the Rebbe gives all of his brachas for Gashmias and for Ruchnias, for health, and for Kinderlach, and for Nachas, and for Panosa, and for Shaduchim, and for Sholem, and for Atzlocha, and for Avodah, and all the things that are important to us and important to the Rebbe. And that's the most important thing. The important thing is to appreciate that the Rebbe is giving the brachas, and in some way the Rebbe speaks into the heart of each person, and that's the reason. That's the real reason that we're gathered here. It is Erev Rosh Hashono. It's literally 3 days before Rosh Hashono, 2 days before Rosh Hashono. So this is it's Chodesh Elul. And Chodesh Elul is the Chodesh of Cheshbon. It's the month of stock taking. It's the Chodesh of Rachamim and Slichos. It's the Chodesh of Melach Basada. And it's also the Chodesh of Tshuva. This is the time of the year that we take a look at our own selves and we try to renew our sense of identity as Jewish people. And this is the time that we wish one another, that Rebbe wishes each one of us, we should have a Seder's Tshuva. We should have an awakening of Tshuva, an awakening of Tshuva. And of course, Tshuva does not necessarily have to mean Aveda. Tshuva is not necessarily about the things that we're doing wrong. Tshuva means to return to who and what we really are. So all the good that we do in Elul, there's a tshuva, there's a return and a renewal of all of those things. And it begins with a hisoidus. It begins with an emotional awakening, with a refocusing on our own avodas Hashem. Each one of us, based on our circumstance and based on our capability, and based on we're holding an avodas Hashem. But one of the truths of Yiddishkeit in general, and of tshuva in particular, is loy ha-medrash iker ela ha-maaseh. The credibility of our avodas Hashem to us, to the Rebbe, to the Eibishter, is measured ultimately in the actions that we take. So at this time of year, there's an awakening of tshuva, there's a movement, there's an arousal for us to be focused, engaged, better, more on ourselves and our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the measure of the value of that hisoidus, the measure of the value of that tshuva, of that awakening, of the increase of maisim tovim, of good deeds that we do. In other words, in Yiddishkeit, the biggest ideas, tshuva is one of the biggest ideas in Yiddishkeit, is measured, is defined, is tested by the smallest ideas. By little actions, one good action, a second good action, a third good action, that defines the quality and the integrity of our tshuva. And it says in Chassidus, it's brought in my Maimon, and the Rebbe speaks about it often, that the one deficiency, so to speak, the one chesaron, if there is one, in Chodesh Tishrei is that we're focused on Ruchnius, we're focused on Pnimiyus, we're focused on Avas Hashem, on Yiras Hashem, on Tshuva. And therefore, Chassidus discusses that straight from Tishrei, straight from Yom Kippur, straight from Tishrei, we need to do mitzvahs. Because mitzvahs, actionable mitzvahs, are the measure of the integrity of our tshuva. Now this is an unusual year. Tafshin Pei Dal to Tafshin Pei Hey is an unusual year because we, the Jewish people, have been engaged in a milchama, have been engaged in a war for almost an entire year. And it doesn't leave the mind and the heart of any one of us, even those of us who are living far away from Eretz Yisrael, and certainly those who are living in Eretz HaKodesh and Eretz Yisrael. It's every breath, every thought is b'mayrov, has to do with the condition that our brothers and sisters find themselves in Eretz HaKodesh and Eretz Yisrael. So I looked through the sichos from 50 years ago, from Tafshin Lamed Dalet, 1973-74, when there was the Yom Kippur War. That war, which took place 50 years ago, in many ways is parallel to what's going on now, except that we hope that this time there'll be the kind of nitzachin, the kind of victory that there's not going to have to be another war ever again. So I looked at the Rebbe's sichos, different ideas that the Rebbe discussed about that milchama, and I'm going to share a number of them, and I'm going to point out the lessons that the Rebbe learns from each one of these heroes that touches each one of us. In other words, not every person in this room is actually going out to fight on the front. But in Torah, there's ha'ama yetel l'milchama, and there's ha'ama yeshev al ha'kelim. Every Jew is a soldier in this war. Every one of us is a warrior in this milchama for the kiyum of Am Yisrael. Some of us literally have to hold guns, and unfortunately they're all young. They're very young. They're mamish kids, and the burden lies on them. That's how the Eibishter made the world. But each yid, in his or her way, is a part of this milchama. And the hayrois, the lessons that are negel ma'aseh that touch our behavior, are for each one of us. So I have a list of ideas that I want to share that the Rebbe discussed during that year, and the lessons that we could learn from them. The first lesson is that people have a tendency of saying, people have a tendency of giving themselves credit for the successes that they have. The way the world works is that when you're under a very, very difficult condition of stress, when you're in a state of great, great emergency, everybody remembers the Eibishter. And everybody realizes that whatever we have, and certainly the incredible nisim and niflos that we've witnessed this year, are not our doing, it's the Eibishter. But we forget quite quickly when things become even a drop normal, we start to pat ourselves on the back and to say we're heroes. And the Rebbe spoke very emphatically how we have to remember that everything that happens in this world, and everything that happens particularly to the Jewish people, and everything that happens even more particularly to the Yidden and Eretz Yisrael, especially in a Maimed Matzav like this one, is the Eibishter. And it's not us, it's him. And therefore, although a soldier in an army has to do everything b'derech hateva to be successful, but he has to remember Yishoin al Hatzur Baruch Hu, that we lean on the Eibishter. And whatever successes we have is because of him. And therefore, when we go out to fight a war, since the koiches that we have for this struggle and the successes that we see in these struggles come directly from the Eibishter, so our response to the circumstances has to reflect what he wants, rather than an attitude that has to do with our own successes. And the lesson in this is very plain and very obvious. Each person, in all of his or her endeavors, has to always remember that all of our brachas come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I don't know how to say this. We shouldn't get carried away with ourselves. It's not us, it's the Eibishter. And when we maintain that sense of humility and bittul, we are a better keli for the brachas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Number two, another lesson that the Rebbe talked about. This has to do with soldiers. When soldiers fight, they're at great risk. I don't have to tell you. When soldiers go out to engage in a hot war of pursuit, they're mamish misaken chayeyim. They risk their lives by pal mamish. And the result of that is that there's an enormous amount of pressure and stress on the soldier, not just when he actually goes out to fight, but when he comes back to rest between engagements. His whole life is so under an enormous amount of pressure because of the earnestness of what he is engaged in and with. So one of the most important things that every army deals with is what's called morale. You have to keep the spirits of the soldiers up. You don't want the soldiers to lose their cheshik, their willingness to fight. So how do you boost morale? So the Rebbe spoke about this. So the attitude is you bring in comedians, you bring in entertainers, you bring in all kinds of shows, all kinds of things that are distracting. You get the soldier to stop thinking about where he is and what he's doing, and you make him laugh, so he relaxes for a few minutes, and then he has koyach to go to the next mission, to the next fight. So the Rebbe spoke about this 50 years ago, and the Rebbe said that the soldiers are saying, the actual chayalim who are going and fighting are saying, we don't need comedians, we need tefillin. We don't need to be distracted. We don't need to hear jokes that make us forget about our maimed matziv so that we'll relax. We need a Eibishter. And the Rebbe spoke by Fabrengen about this idea that it's incumbent upon the leadership to provide the soldiers what the soldiers say they need. And what they need is the Eibishter. And this Rabbi Sai, ladies and gentlewomen, is a lesson for us always. Some of us sometimes feel that the burden in our life is Teda Mitzvahs, Rahman al-Litzlah. And you have to relax. And you have to take time off. And do things a little bit less intently and seriously. So we see that when a Yid is in the most difficult maimed matzav in his life, what does he need for strength? Teda Mitzvahs. What does he need for strength? The Eibishter. And the lesson of this is, Rabbi Sai, Torah and mitzvahs that the Eibishter gave us is the best thing we have. The most meaningful and rich and uplifting aspect in our life is our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah that we learn, and the mitzvahs that we do, and the life that we live is chayenu. It gives us life. We draw strength from it. But if you're not standing on the front, and your life is not materially and actually in danger, you forget that lesson. So you have a young 18, 19, 20-year-old Israeli boy who's not from a frum home, who says to his commander, I don't need a comedian, I need tefillin. And the lesson for us is that wherever we are in our lives, wherever we find ourselves in the world, we have to remember the Teda Mitzvahs is not just the Eibishter strapping us in. Every mitzvah we do, the Yiddishkeit which defines our lives, this is our morale, this is our strength. This gives us meaning, it gives us purpose, and it gives us happiness. And we should never shy away from that priority. Number 3, this is unbelievable. 50 years ago, when the Yom Kippur War started, it was unfortunately quite similar to what happened a year ago on Simchas Torah. In the very, very beginning, for reasons which we're not going to discuss, there was a very big setback on the side of Eretz Yisrael. And the mood was very depressed. The mood in the whole Jewish world was full of fear and full of heaviness, depression. And from the first moment, from the first moment, before the tide of war turned, the Rebbe talked about simcha. The Rebbe discussed that the Utzu Eitza V'Sufa Daber Dava V'Layokam Kimanuel, the Eitze for the Nitzachen is simcha and betochen in the Eibishter. And you should know there's a story that happened 50 years ago last year, which is really remarkable. The beginning of the Yom Kippur War was terrible. And there were nisim gluyim, unbelievable miracles that it wasn't chas v'sholem what could have been. And the Anash, Chassidim, Tbibim were very, very alarmed. The Rebbe is talking about simcha, and the newspapers are talking about calamity and tragedy and who knows what. So on Chal HaMoed Sukkos, Elter Chassidim, Emes Chassidische Yidden, truly earnest Chassidim, presented the Rebbe with a pidyon nefesh for the situation in Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe became irritated. And he said, Ich halt jetzt bazman simchaseinu. I am now holding by the simcha of Sukkos. And I'm not going to allow you to disrupt my simcha because of your concerns. And the Rebbe refused to take the pidyon. The Rebbe refused to take the pidyon. Told him take it to the Frierdiker Rebbe Tzimtzion, to the oil. The Rebbe says, the Eitze HaYeutze for all of these, the Shenis is simcha and betochen and HaKadosh Baruch. It's a standard solution from the Rebbe, but in this particular instance, there was a special priority. The Rebbe spoke. The Rebbe spoke that the fact that the war started Yom Kippur is because right after Yom Kippur is a zman of simcha, to be a message that the solution, the way in Ruchnius we contribute to the Nitzachan Gomor is through simcha, through joy. Now, Teva Bnei Adam, the human nature doesn't exactly account for this, but Klal and especially Befrat. But this is what the Rebbe teaches. That to succeed in everything, you have to have simcha. The avoid of simcha, the morale of simcha, is a basis for Nitzachan. Number 4. When you fight a war, you have an enemy. That's how it works. You have an enemy. And the Rambam discusses how you have to understand what an enemy means. And because he's your enemy, you have to behave as you're supposed to behave towards an enemy. It's not pativ. And he gives a dugma for it. The Rambam brings a pasuk that you should know that when you're fighting with another Yid, a civil war, Rachmana litzlan said they're going to have Rachmanas on you. But in a war, you're fighting with an enemy. And you have to know that he's your enemy. You have to know that your enemy is your enemy. And this Rabbi Sai is a very, very important Torah for those of us who live in America. B'chlal, those of us who live in the modern world. Our lives, compared to the lives of the Yidden 100 years ago, are materially, our bagashmius, very good, very comfortable, even very safe. And we sometimes forget who the enemy is. We sometimes forget that the Yetzer Hara is our enemy, and that the Yetzer Hara is called the Kluginker. Yetzer Hara is called Zaken Uksil. Zaken Uksil means a fool, but in Yiddish, he's devious. And he uses all kinds of ways to convince us that what he wants for us is God the Kavana Yoina. A person has to know who his enemy is. And with an enemy you fight. And an enemy you can't have Rachmanis. Our enemy is our own Yetzer Hara. Now the Yetzer Hara doesn't only come to us and say, don't eat kosher. The Yetzer Hara doesn't only come to us and say, Rachmana litzlan, you shouldn't keep Shabbos. The Yetzer Hara is much smarter than that. Yetzer Hara comes with all kinds of suggestions that sound not so bad. They're just about greater comfort and greater convenience, but they take away from our Torah and our Avodah. And you have to know Seinacha. Every one of us has to know that the Yetzer Hara is our enemy. And in our war with our own Yetzer Hara, like the Rebbe used to speak, the Rebbe speaks to the children of Tzivas Hashem. When you're fighting with the Yetzer Hara, you don't negotiate. When you're fighting with the Yetzer Hara, you don't meet him halfway. He's your enemy. Each one of us, I think, maybe there's a few tzidkonias in the room. Rubam kekulam, we all have a Yetzer Hara, and our Yetzer Hara is very devious. And he has 1,001 ways of explaining to us that what he's asking us to do is God the Ratzon Elyon, and it's Senacha, it's our enemy. And what a war teaches, that there's no compromise with an enemy. And the same is true in our fight with our own Yetzer Hara. Each one of us in our battles, whatever those battles are, we start to play games with ourselves. This isn't so bad, and this isn't so important, and this is not such a big deal. Every soldier in the front knows there's no such thing as not so bad. There's no such thing as not so important. And there's no such thing as not such a big deal, because it's pekuach nefesh, it's life and death. Mamish. And in Hayro and Avodas Hashem, our war with our own Yetzer Hara is the same way. And we have to approach our own struggles as Yidden and as Hasidim and as servants of the Rebbe with that measure, with that value system, that what the Eibishter wants is important. And all the other things we have to be very careful. Yetzer Hara shouldn't work his way into our lives and tell us that he's a friend. And with the enemy you got to fight. It says Taka in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, Ozev Tazev Ima, you shouldn't break the goof. But you have to know Senacha. You have to know that Yetzer Hara is our enemy. One more, I have a few more lessons, but I'll just share one or two more and I'll stop. One of the things that we know from the whole history of Eretz Yisrael and the Rebbe's approach is that the worst thing is pshara. Every time we made compromise, and we made compromise because we wanted to give people a chance, and we wanted to make shalom, whatever the reasons were. Every time there was a pshara, the situation got worse on the ground, b'pel mamish. And Achmana Litzlan, more lives were lost. And the Rebbe screamed, not because he's a mean Rebbe, but because he's a wise Rebbe, and a visionary Rebbe, and a Rebbe of Emes. That Eretz Yisrael has to be safe, and for Eretz Yisrael to be safe, it has to be strong. And for Eretz Yisrael to be safe, and for Eretz Yisrael to be strong, it can't compromise, it has to be principled. The Rebbe spoke many times. 70 years ago, Kamat, there was a Reform rabbi whose name was Herbert Weiner. He came to the Rebbe many times. At the end of his life, he became Mamash Afruma Yid. He interviewed the Rebbe, I think in 1956, Sashin Tezayin or Yudzayin, a long time ago. And he asked the Rebbe then, mit Karga Zibitzik Yor Tzrik, almost 70 years ago, please listen to this. What is the secret of the success of Lubavitch? He asked the Rebbe then, what is the reason Lubavitch has hatzlacha in outreach when others are failing? And the Rebbe didn't say because we're non-judgmental, although that's true too. The Rebbe said no compromise. No pshara. The Rebbe spoke about this many times. When you're Makarav a Yid, he doesn't have to do all 630 mitzvahs on the first day. But he has to know that there were 630 mitzvahs. Today he'll do one. Tomorrow we'll do another. Next week he'll do a third. But he has to know we're not giving him a half a Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbe spoke during the 50s and the 60s especially about young people, about the Noyar. Youth, kids hate halfway. They hate pshara. They're doing it 100% or they're not doing it at all. And the Rebbe spoke when he gave to Eretz Yisrael and the safety of Eretz Yisrael, that they can't be compromised. And the lesson from this, Moirav and Aboisai, is absolutely clear and resonating. We are Lubavitch Chassidim. Lubavitch Chassidim are not halfway. Lubavitch and the Rebbe is Yireh Shamayim at Koitzei Shel Yud. No compromise. For some people, sometimes, especially younger people, it becomes difficult. So you have to, like the Rebbe said to somebody, don't pull the string too tight because it could snap. But each one of us has to know the emes ba'asher hu. Each one of us has to know the emes hatohira, the truth. That we do not believe in compromise. We believe in Yiddishkeit and Shulchan Aruch without any pshara. If we want Jews who are not from in Eretz Yisrael to deal with the Maimed Matzav Mesukim B'Yoser. And they shouldn't compromise, because the Rebbe said, we in our own lives need to take that lesson for ourselves, because the Rebbe said it to us, that there's no pshara, there's no compromise. Yiddishkeit is the most important thing in our life, it's the most meaningful thing in our life, and we don't cut corners. One more lesson, one more. The Rebbe spoke in Cheshvan Tafshin Lamed Daled that Yidden are always few in number. Atam ha'me'at mikol ha'amim. And the Rebbe said one of the things that we see now in the Milchamas Bechlal in the world, but especially when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, is the idea that echos is more important than kamos. Quality is more important than quantity. And the Rebbe said it used to be the nation with the bigger army won the war. But as we became more sophisticated, whatever it is, we've learned that how many soldiers you have is very important, and how many bombs you have is very important, but the quality of your approach, the quality of your soldiers, and the quality of your strategy is more important than the quantity. And the Yidden have always found themselves in this position, that in quantity they're less, but of course the Eibishter, the Eibishter walks amongst us, and he brings us all the nitzchaynes. Not chas v'shom koichi v'oitzem yodi, it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Still, b'derech hateva, atam ha'ma'at mikol ha'amim, the Jewish people are the fewest. And our victories, our nitzachain is echos against kamas, quality against quantity. And the lesson from this Rabbi Yisai is, a person sometimes says, if I'm going to do one more mitzvah, it's going to make such a big difference. If I'm going to speak one word less Lashon Hara, it's going to make such a big difference. If I'm going to say Nacha Kapitel Tilim, or put Nacha Penny in a pushkes, it makes such a big difference. And the answer is absolutely. Because the good that we do may be in quantity, in kamas, small, but in echos it has no limit. And therefore we have to appreciate the importance of our little actions. As small as we may be in our own eyes, and we are small. But the good that we do, especially those things that we do, because each one of us thinks every minute about Eretz Yisrael, about Eretz HaKadosh, our brothers and sisters. We should know that there's no such thing as a good deed that's not that important. Because echos is machriach kamos. That's what the Rebbe said in this year. Quality is more important than quantity. I just want to finish the way I started. That we're gathered here because the Rebbe is here. And the Rebbe is giving brachas, and the Rebbe is giving atzlochas, and the Rebbe is giving yeshuas. And the Rebbe gives and gives and gives and gives. The Eibush should bless us all, that we should put out our hands and should receive all the brachas in the Eibush, the begashmis, the beruchnias, and we should have a ksiva v'chasim b'teiva, b'teich, kol, shar, achenu, v'achisenu, b'nei Yisrael, v'chol mokim sheheim. And we should all collectively, as an individuals, have a ksiva v'chasim b'teiva, and we sollen sich sicher sein, sehr mit den Reben, take it from a yad mamish. And we should have the gula amitas v'ashlema. And we should go to Eretz Yisrael with the heads held high, kememias. Okay, a good yad, ksiva v'chasim b'teiva.